Sergiy Tymchenko, and I am a director of Christian Center REALIS, which is based in Kiev, Ukraine. This center primary goal is to help people of Ukraine and of other countries that's our neighbors to see reality of God in their everyday life. And we do it through different means. One of them is teaching pastors and Christian leaders and many others of what Christianity is about and how to help other people to see true Christianity in their real life. So, for example, we had this program that you were part of, which was training Christian chaplains and to help them to understand what chaplaincy means and how to use their faith in such critical situations as we have now in Ukraine.
Okay, very interesting. Can we go back a little bit in history? Because, you know, before Dave and I went there, we knew nothing about Ukraine. We didn't even hardly know where it was on the map. And you and your team were so instrumental in helping us to understand and really raising our consciousness about the issues there, which we don't hear much about here in the States. So I wondered if you could just briefly give a short history and why that impacts the church and things going on now.
You mean history of what? Of Ukraine or of the war? What?
The war and Euromaidan. I know I asked in the questions about your father, a story about your father being part of an underground church during the Soviet era. So maybe we could start with that. Could you tell me about your father and the underground church?
Well, my father was a believer from his young years. In fact, his father, my grandfather, whom I also remember, was one of the evangelical, he was Baptist pastor, one of the first Baptist leaders in Ukraine in early 20th century. So my father became member of underground church after there was a new rule that was imposed on churches by Khrushchev in early 60s of last century. So I was at that time a very young boy, and according to that rule, believers still could go to church, but because Khrushchev promised that he will show the last Christian on TV, he will eliminate Christians from Soviet Union. He already forbade to take children, to bring children to church. So those parents as my parents, those people as my parents who had children and they still wanted to take them to the church, didn't have any other choice as to begin together in secret meetings, secret gatherings. My father was an engineer. He was a civil engineer, and his boss and the other administration of the company where he worked and the city of Kiev, when they found out that there is an engineer who is part of underground church now, they did what they always do with what they always did with Christians in atheist country. In fact, this kind of things happen in my life as well. They suggested him a deal. Either you will cooperate with us and will become our kind of guy still going to the church, or you will be miserable because your salary will never go higher than even the cleaning lady in our company. So my father chose the second, and so for many years he had to work second job during nighttime, night shifts somewhere, so that he would be able to feed his family. But he still was able to take me and then my sisters to church, and I grew up because of that, a Christian myself. So that is a brief story of my father. There are many other interesting details later on. For example, the same, well, it was in different situation, but the same kind of idea. My father was suggested, it was when he already was quite accomplished engineer, still with not very high salary, but they said you could go to work as an engineer on a Soviet plant that built new plants somewhere in Near East, which means very high salary and so. But you have to cooperate with us. Again, he said no. Again, he was pressed down. So at that time, many people were persecuted more severely. If you are active leader who is working with children, evangelizing children, or doing some kind of very active work of trying to resist the political system, you would be thrown in jail. My grandfather was, for example, in jail for some time under Stalin. But my father was never in jail, but he was persecuted in different way, as I explained.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, how did that move? What was the impact on you as a result of some of those experiences as a child, to know about your parents and your grandparents? Were you harassed at school, or tell me about some of those things?
Well, no, I was not really harassed. There were some times when children, because children from school who were probably told by someone, by a teacher, by someone that there is a this Christian among you, and you have just to know that he might be. I don't know what did they say, but as a result, I felt that children tried to either avoid me or at some point even tried to physically hit me. But it was not really always the problem, because I was a good student, and in fact I was outgoing in a sense. So I had still many friends, so it was not a problem. There was another situation that I can share with you briefly.
Yeah.
It was about my last year in the school, and I had straight A's in school.
Wow.
And so I was called to the office of the vice principal of the school, and the vice headmaster, and there was a lady. She said she was a member of Communist Party and with some position there. She said, "Sergey, you have all straight A's, and because of that, you would be qualified to go to the college without exams. But you are not member of Young Communist League. I assume it's because you're a believer, but let's make a deal." The same thing. I will not tell anyone about this, but if you agree to become secret member of Young Communist League, you will have opportunity to study in college. Otherwise, if not, I'm obliged to send a letter to all colleges, all universities of Kiev, to tell them that even though you have all good grades, you are not qualified to study further. So that was one of those things that when I felt that I have to make a choice.
Yes. Yes.
And yeah, I said it's okay. I will not be member, even secretly. And God provided for me opportunity to study. In fact, I was able to study in Moscow instead of Kiev. But it's another story, maybe for another time.
Yes. Well, that was very courageous of you to do that, make that decision.
No, it was not. It was
No?
okay.
Well, I'm interested in, because this is a presentation for the church about Euromaidan, which of course was a huge situation. Do you see any role that the church played in that? I know you told me about the monasteries and stuff and people going there. I will tell them some about Euromaidan separately from what we talk about. But do you have any stories you'd like to tell me about that, or tell the class about that?
Sure. I think, well, of course, I have so many stories, and I understand the limitations of the time. So I probably will just give you one or two of the most distinct stories that I experienced myself. Of course, yes, it was very important that, for example, that Orthodox monastery was open its gate for for people who were suffering under really severe beatings from police, but then closed the gates before police later. But I didn't see it. I've heard about it, and it's a famous story about the bell in one of the monasteries was, in fact, the same monastery was ringing when there was attack on protesters, and many people, including myself, ran to help. But for me, I think the most important story, or several stories, are connected with prayer, not with protest, not with fine, but with prayer. And I think it was one of the most significant moments in my life, when it was even before 9 years before this last event that we called Maidan. There was another Maidan that we called Orange Revolution. It was kind of similar effect, but it was in 2004. And during the first big meeting, when many thousands people came together, first day of protest, they invited priests and pastors to pray. And people from Orthodox Church and from Catholic Church and from Greek Catholic Church and from Baptist and from Charismatic all gathered together. So how they would pray. And they figured out, let's pray the prayer that probably most people may recognize or may kind of relate to, the prayer, Our Father in Heaven. And so they said, we will pray this prayer several times. One of us will pray in Ukrainian language, another in Russian language, another in English, another in Polish, and then again. And so I don't remember how many times, but people would recognize several languages, and they would pray, many of them. And then I opened my eye and I looked around, and I remember that snow a little bit coming down in the evening, and all people around me were in prayer mode. It was the biggest prayer meeting in my life, when people felt that they need God in this situation. Then similar situation became almost ordinary. That first time was so big. For example, one time it was me who I was asked to pray for all people gathered there from the big stage and say a few words to them. And I remember that amazing feeling when so many thousand eyes look at you, and it's not just, maybe you say something that meant that you have to give us hope, because God, you are the one who can help us. So I think that my prayer for all those people was probably the most memorable prayer in my life. Well, maybe with the exception of the one when I gave my life to Christ when I was 17 years old. And then the third example of prayer was during the tragic last 3 days of many people being shot in late February of 2014. And at that time, people understood that prayer is not only important, but that it is probably the only means for them to survive.